Today on the Hobby Bench, I'll be painting an 80s Soviet soldier from Eureka Miniatures. So for Zona Alpha, I picked up these Eureka miniatures. They're 80s Soviets in Afghan uniforms and pretty much done what I've typically done. I painted them gray and dry brushed them white. But for the skin, I laid down a base coat of white. I found a lot really for these express paints, they need to have that base. And I found actually the Ferrous skin's a little too thin maybe to have some of that detail stand out. And so I decided to go ahead and make a different approach here and just give it a really thin sepia ink wash first. And this is just to help bring out a little bit more of the detail there in the hands, and especially like around the face and stuff. It's a little bit hard, somewhat to tell the difference between maybe the neck and the collar, having that white undercoat. So I went ahead and gave this a little bit of a base there. And I think this is to help add a little bit more depth to the paint. Using the Express paint, and rather than probably going back afterwards, and just try something a little bit different this time and just initially give it that sepia ink wash. This is pretty thinned out, and you can see here that I've got that base down. It just brings out just a little more of that detail there around its fingers and stuff like that. So typically a lot of these miniatures, that's what I'll work with. I'll usually work with the skin and the uniform and work my way out. So I'll be using Fairy Skin as a contrast paint to get over his flesh tones. And take a little bit of time to get in focus here, but just working through this pretty carefully like I typically do. And I found that, this sepia ink, just as a quick little base coat, helps, add a little more depth in between his fingers and stuff like that initially. Something I would go after and, just do a wash after that. This time I'm sort of just doing it in reverse order. And found, that really does help add just a tad more depth and maybe speed up the process a little bit. So I'm still working through these contrast paints and sometimes figuring out the best way to work with them. But for sure, these skins, they're lovely tones, but they're a little thin. And so for sure, having a white undercoat helps. But you can see here, definitely having that sepia ink works quite well. Now I'm going to be moving on to his uniform. For that, I'll just be using military yellow. And this is a pretty great khaki color, and just, applying a nice even coat, pretty much going through everything. I'm not diluting it out anything at all. And this is just a really lovely shade. And I think it matches pretty much the Soviet uniform. Now I'm pulling something off some Osprey images, some Osprey illustrations. I'm really not well versed at all in the Afghanistan campaign for the Soviet Union. So, I'm pretty much going to be going on what they've got here. But I'm giving it a nice even coat and just, covering up as much as possible. You can just sort of see it really does impart this lovely color, this lovely khaki look. And so here you go. I've got this, covered down. It looks out pretty well. And now I'm going to be working on a little bit more of his webbing. I'm going to go ahead and be using Desert Ochre. And that's a pretty nice neutral tone too. I'm just adding a little bit, some various browns and some khakis. And so that'd be like more of his underdress there. And I apologize. I'm sure like the historical military guys are going to go nuts over this because I really am not well versed at all on, the webbing and stuff like that they have here. But this covers rather well. And I think it leaves a nice undertone shade. And so that's what I'm really going for, is just some different colors here to sort of help like make the webbing and some of his underdress just stand out a little bit more. So I'm just, painting up that jacket he's got there. Carefully going on the edges and just, working my way through it as well as I can. And again, I'm using this undiluted. It works out pretty well. It's got a nice tone. And you can just carefully going along here, trying not to get anything in the other areas. But if you do, that's okay. You can always sort of go back and work on it again. And just really carefully just working out my way on that. And that's got a pretty nice tone there. It's pretty well covered up. And now I'm going to be working a little bit more on his webbing. And for that one, I'm going to be using Bag of Bones. This is pretty nice. I would say a really nice light khaki color, like a nice light brown. And I think for all his webbing and stuff like that, you know, it just adds a little bit of a different shade from everything else. And, you know, it matches up pretty well, I think, with, you know, what they probably had. And, you know, it's just not too outlandish of a color. And I just really carefully going over the webbing. Now, here what's sort of nice is that if you do mess up a little bit, you do get a little bit over the one. It's a lighter shade, so it's not going to be that much of an issue because you've got a darker shade that's next to it. And so I'm just carefully going through his ammo pouches and, you know, just giving that a nice light coat. And it's depending on how it is, you know, I may go back and give it another coat, but I think that one coat will work enough. You know, sometimes you get some areas that dry up, you can always get back to it again. And here you go. I've got that done. It's, you know, completed up. And it's starting to look pretty good. And it's a subtle difference between the shades, but I really like that. And for this one now, I'm going to be using Willow Bark. It's a nice deep brown color. I'm going to be using that for a satchel case. And again, it's just to impart, you know, a different little bit shade there, give a little bit more definition between the different stuff that he has, rather than probably this being everything, you know, one single color for all the webbing and stuff like that. So I'm going to be painting up a satchel case and working through that pretty well. And this is undilute, and I think it has a nice dark color. It covers really well. And, you know, just like a lot of contrast paints, you just want to carefully work on one section at a time and go through that way. And just slowly working through it here. Just adding what details I can. And, you know, this is going to be a different shade, and it'll really help make that satchel stand out just a little more compared to what would probably be a very rather bland looking uniform. So I've got that done here, and, you know, it's looking pretty good. I'm pretty happy with it. And, you know, now I'm going to be working on his helmet, and for that I'm going to be using Commando Green. And it's a pretty nice color. Again, it may not be that accurate for it, but that's what I'm going to be using. I'm also going to be using Hospitallier Black. I'm going to be using that for the rifle. But first, I'm going to go ahead and just go to his helmet real quick here. And, you know, this is one simple coat. And, you know, I think it's pretty close to probably what you typically would have for helmets of that decade. This may not be 100% match, but it looks pretty close enough for me, and I'm happy with it. And just going through and just giving it an even coat. And as I mentioned before, you know, I'm going to go back to use a Hospitallier Black just to go over to the AK-47 that he's got. And I'm just slowly working through here, just trying not to get any on the skin and stuff like that, which would sort of be a little bit of a disaster. So just trying to be very careful here, especially here. You know, not having too much on the brush helps a lot. And just really carefully work on the lip of his helmet there, and just trying not to get that in the skin. You can see here I got that done. I've already like painted up the AK-47 with the Hospitallier Black. And, you know, it's a pretty good color. So now I'm going to be working on some different things here. And I've also done his boots, also in the Hospitallier Black. But now I'm going to be using orange brown for these magazines. And this is rather interesting. I realized, I did not know that. I guess they were more of a light yellow or a light green color. But the plastic that they use, you know, as it aged, it turned to more of an orange color. And, you know, I guess that's pretty much what you see a lot from these old images of the Soviets in the Afghanistan. But that's what I'm painting up right now, is just these orange mags. And it's a great color for it. I think it matches very well. So just carefully going through there, just trying to make sure I don't get it in other areas. And, you know, it looks pretty good. And you can see the furniture I painted on there. I ended up going back and painting that mahogany brown just for the handguard there. And this has got more of a folding stock, so I didn't have to worry with that. So that's just, you know, what I'm painting. And I'm going to add a little bit more depth to that. So I'm going to be using some dark blue gray. That's going to be just dry brushed on there. That's going to be for the AK-47, just to add a little bit more detail to the barrel there. And so I'm just going to give it a very light dry brush with that, and just, you know, help that, you know, stand out a little bit more. And I also went back, and you didn't really quite show this, but just to add a touch more detail, I had a really thin sepia ink wash that I gave to that magazine to sort of help add a little bit more depth to that. But just using this dry brush here, just to sort of pick out some of the stuff there. And I like that. It, it adds just a little bit more of some color definition to that. And, there you go. I paint up a simple craft paint for the base. I'll end up probably by putting down some flock, and that'll, give it a more of a heavy look there. But I think for Zona Alfa, man, these Eureka miniatures, they're great. And using contrast paints, it works out pretty well. I'm going to use a bit of flock, as I showed to show you there. That'll just help add a little bit more life to that base there. But that's about it, man. Contrast paints, there you go. I love the Vallejo Xpress stuff, and it's a pretty easy paint job to do, pretty well put together. Love the figures. Can't wait to get it to the tabletop.